Confucius Institutes look to be the latest casualty from escalating tensions between China and the U.S. The Chinese language and cultural programs have been designated as foreign missions. But critics say it's just the latest move in the U.S.'s ongoing campaign to villainize China. So, what difference does the new label make? And the two sides are reportedly postponing their scheduled talks on the Phase 1 trade deal indefinitely. Given ties are unraveling on practically every other issue, what roles does the trade deal play in saving or further souring the relationship? Welcome to The Point, coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Li Qiuyuan, sitting in for Liu Xin. Now, China says it firmly opposes the U.S.'s decision to designate Confucius Institutes in the U.S. as a foreign mission. The Chinese language and cultural program must now register its staff or property holdings following the same new regulations put on Chinese state media outlets operating there in the States. In defense of the move, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo called the centers an entity for advancing Beijing's global propaganda and malign influence campaign on U.S. campuses and key K-12 classrooms, and argues that the new label will not close the centers but ensure much-needed transparency. But a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson accused the U.S. of demonizing cooperation projects between the two countries, which are already suffering an unraveling of ties. So given the centers have been promoting language learning and cultural exchanges around the world since 2014, why did the U.S. make the move now? And how does it alter the picture of China-U.S. relations? And what does it mean for Chinese educational exchange in the United States? I'm now joined via Skype by Professor Stephen Goldstein, Associate at the Fairbank Center for China Studies at Harvard University in Massachusetts, and also in Beijing by Professor Teng Jimeng, former visiting Fulbright Scholar based at Boston College and New York University. Great to see you both. So, before I get to your reactions, let's first take a look at some of the accusations against the Institute. First, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo called it an entity advancing Beijing's global propaganda and malign influence campaign on United States campuses and K-12 classrooms. Second, an opinion piece in Foreign Policy magazine called it China's Trojan horse. And third, the American Association of University Professors has argued Confucius Institutes threatened academic freedom. But now, critics have said the move is just part of the Trump administration's recent push to smear all things that China does. And in response to the move, Confucius Institute United States Center has called the State Department's designation a fundamental misunderstanding that must be cleared up. Also, here's what China's Foreign Ministry says. Take a listen at this.
We urge the U.S. to abandon this Cold War and zero-sum mindset, correct its mistakes immediately, stop politicizing education and exchange programs, and interfering in normal China-U.S. people-to-people and cultural exchange. We reserve the right to respond further to this.
So, Professor Goldstein, let me get your take first. The Confucius statement is calling this a misunderstanding. What do you think?
Well, I think you have to have a little bit of background to understand the Confucius Institutes. When they were founded originally, they were very controversial. And they were very controversial first because it was an institution in an American university that was managed by the Chinese Ministry of Education. Secondly, it was controversial because the contracts were not made public. Thirdly, it was controversial because many academics felt that although the focus was on culture and language, it would eventually influence the substance of teaching about China. Now, the AAUP statement that you quote, I believe is 6 years old, because what has subsequently happened is that the universities themselves have moved, and all of this has been changed. For example, contracts are now public. You can go on the internet and see Tufts University's contract with the Confucius Institute. But secondly, and more importantly, the host schools have total, again to repeat, total control over the substance and the outlines of the Confucius Institutes. And I think this is more or less satisfied. This was under pressure from the teaching and research community in the United States who work on China. And I think this has been largely successful. Most people now accept the Confucius Institute in this form. I might add, there was one more stipulation in the original, and that is that nothing the Confucius Institute could do could violate Chinese law. Now, you could see why that would cause concern, those four stipulations. And those were addressed by academics the way anything that has to do with an academic institution should be addressed. There's no reason for the United States government to have intervened in this. It's part of the tit for tat. It's not going to close the Confucius Institutes. It's not going to violate the contracts that the individual universities have made. It's just a symbolic gesture. What concerns me as an educator is that the Confucian Institutes, at least the one that I know at Tufts, is now managed in a way that's consistent with American academic freedom.
And here's the thing, Professor Teng, let me bring you into this. Confucius Institutes have been compared to other countries' educational facilities that promote language and culture also in the United States. For example, Goethe Institute is directly financed by the national government of Germany. Alliance Française has been directly financed by the French government since 1883. And similar institute has been run by the Spanish government since 1991. Of course, Confucius Institute, funded and arranged by the Chinese Ministry of Education, it started operation in 2004. Now, all the institutes claim to promote their respective countries' language and culture, and yet only the Chinese program has been singled out. What does it say to you, Professor Teng?
Well, I think it's unfair. I think this is also unmistakably kind of wrong in terms of selecting or single that Confucius Institute out. To a large extent, I think this is based on false information and perhaps the kind of misunderstanding and misstep in the initial stage. If you take, for example, many of the acquisitions focus on Confucius Institute operating directly on the campuses of the United States. But if you look at the Goethe Institute used to operate on university campuses also directly. I mean, look at Beijing Foreign Studies University. We had a Goethe Institute, 20 years ago. They operate directly on our campus and used the faculties and the students and teachers and professors of the German department. And in that sense, it doesn't bother us, and it cooperates in a very smooth way. Of course, we can learn from these institutes like the Cervantes or the Alliance, and by moving them out of moving the Confucius Institute out of the campuses, and perhaps by kind of entrusting a civil society organization or NGO organization to manage this very organization. And I think that Confucius Institute is working towards that way, and so it is no reason to single Confucius Institute out.
Now, a report from Human Rights Watch concerning the abrupt closure of the University of Maryland's Confucius Institute in 2019 cites the university saying that it closed the institute because it was forced to decide between keeping it open or receiving funding for language learning from the U.S. Department of Defense. Have there been other American universities faced with a similar choice? Professor Goldstein, isn't this essentially blackmail?
I'm not sure. As I say, the program that I know best is the program at Tufts. The University of Maryland, it's true, there was in 2018 the passage of a language act that said as of 2019, or the 2019-20 budget, that you could not receive federal funding and funds from the Confucius Institute. Again, as I've said, I think, at least in the cases that I know, the American academic community has acted as it should to address the issues with the Confucius Institute. And as long as the new policies continue, public contracts and as well as strict focus on culture and language, as well as university management, I see no problem with the Confucius Institutes. It's just part of this tit-for-tat game that's being played at the moment by both sides.
But I guess it's bound to make impact. So talk to us about, give us a sense of who will get the hardest hit by this newest decision, like how the program's work is going to be impacted, Professor Goldstein.
First place, this registration is only for the central headquarters in Washington. I'm not aware of any impact that it's having on the individual Confucian Institutes on the various campuses. My guess is that it'll have no impact, except as illustrated in the University of Maryland case, where federal regulations made it clear that it would have to be one or the other. Otherwise, the universities are managing, and that's the way it should be.
Now, in the same response to the U.S. State Department, the Confucius Institute U.S. Center refutes Secretary Pompeo's claims, saying that they have no intention of spreading what we called, I mentioned earlier, this phrase, global campaign of propaganda. So, Professor Teng, the organization invited Pompeo to visit and talk with them about the matter. What do you think is going to happen here? Has the door been left open for talks by the U.S. side, or is this a done deal?
Well, I think it's highly necessary to invite an official, and especially Secretary Pompeo to an organization, and especially the U.S. Center, to conduct this face-to-face kind of discussion. I think perhaps the main reason is this very lack of transparency and lack of communication that caused the current problem. I think with more communication with the State Department, there will be many issues to be addressed and to be clarified, and in this sense, I think it will no longer, in a sense, put this very institution or organization into deeper jeopardy. I think the more this issue is resolved or addressed by both parties, by the organization headquarters in the U.S., by the State Department, and perhaps by the Chinese certain authorities, it would be conducive to create a more kind of a favorable situation for teachers, for students. I mean, back to your previous questions, I think currently, as far as I know, that some of these fall semester students who want to register with the Confucius Institute, actually they cannot, they were hesitating. I mean, they were basically kind of put into a very difficult situation. And so in this sense, the students are suffering. I mean, the students who love the Chinese culture, the students who have been engaged in studying the Chinese, for example, calligraphies and all these civilizational courses, are suffering because they are not quite sure. They're presented with lots of uncertainties.
Professor Teng, just briefly, do you think, because Professor Goldstein has mentioned the tit-for-tat between China and the United States, and this is the latest casualty, Confucius Institute, do you think China will retaliate?
I do not think that China will retaliate. I think, in fact, China will continue our commitment to promote this very cultural exchange. And, in fact, as you know, that Hanban has changed its name. In fact, Hanban has changed the name in terms of helping to facilitate the understanding, the misinformation. And so in this sense, I think the Chinese, especially the educational authorities, will continue to help and to facilitate. And in fact, as far as I know, there are many universities here in Beijing are actually trying to reopen, I mean, their programs to recruit teachers and to send teachers as long as future situations mature.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Professor Stephen Goldstein from the Fairbank Center for China Studies at Harvard University, and Professor Teng Jimeng, former visiting Fulbright Scholar based at Boston College and New York University. Thank you very much.